Europe has announced a full mobilization of its military potential in preparation for a major war with Russia, which is preparing attacks on NATO's eastern flank. Some are strengthening their borders, some are increasing their armies, but most are on NATO's eastern flank. They say the question is not if, but when. NATO countries are strengthening the eastern border with Russia amid weakening United States support for transatlantic security. In particular, Finland conducts monthly drills in the forests near the border with Russia. But that's not all. The publication analyzed the readiness of the countries on NATO's eastern flank for war, and in this episode we will discuss this topic in detail. And I'll note right away that it is Eastern Europe now more than anyone else that is putting in the maximum effort to prepare for the worst. And Denmark, for example, starting today, has begun conscripting women into the army on equal terms with men. My name is Alexei Pechi. Next, we'll go through everything step by step, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. So, it is noted that Finland's accession to NATO in 2023 more than doubled the alliance's border with Russia, to almost 2,600 kilometers stretching from the Arctic to Belarus. Well, and although Moscow is currently occupied with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many along this border expect that Russian President Vladimir Putin will one day turn his attention to NATO's eastern flank. The Russian economy is already geared toward conflict, and Putin's imperial ambitions could mean that he will seek conquests elsewhere. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned last month that Moscow could be ready to use force against the alliance within 5 years. Although United States President Donald Trump assured allies that he is with them all the way. Upon arriving at the summit in The Hague, he alarmed European capitals by hinting that the military alliance's mutual defense pact, known as Article 5, could be interpreted in different ways. NATO Secretary General from 2009 to 2014. Fogh Rasmussen suggests that a victory for Putin in Ukraine could tempt him to test NATO's resolve. As he writes, in practice, Moscow is already taking steps to strengthen its regional presence. Satellite images show increased activity at Russian bases near NATO's eastern flank, including the Levashova, Kamenka, and Olenye airfields. New storage facilities have appeared in Petrozavodsk and at the once decommissioned Severomorsk 1 airbase, which is about 120 kilometers east of Norway. The areas have been cleared and a new runway for aircraft has been built. Although Mark Rutte claims that NATO does not expect any Russian offensive in the near future, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Finnish Defense Forces, Lieutenant General Kari Nisula, says that the question is not if it will happen, but when. The Finns are already preparing for an increase in Russian troops and equipment along the border, but they believe it will take years after the end of the war in Ukraine for them to regain full strength. Military experts say that Moscow's interest in NATO border states is different from its attitude toward Ukraine. Instead of a full-scale invasion, Putin will likely test whether NATO can respond. That is, there will be provocations at first. NATO's new motto is to defend its territory from the very first inch. But it's obvious that in Finland, a temporary concession of territory will be part of any defense plan, writes the author, and then quotes the executive director of the think tank, Charlie Solonius Pasternak. Quote, "You encourage the enemy to advance onto territory you've prepared, let nature do part of the work. There are a lot of forests in central Finland, swamps and marshy terrain in the north, and it's very cold in the far north. We will rely more on nature." Another difference from Ukraine, as he writes, is that Finland would evacuate civilians, especially from the more populated southeast, farther from the border to avoid their persecution. Finnish troops will also destroy roads and bridges near their border. The country is also helped by the readiness of its society. Finland is also one of the few European countries that has long-range missiles in all three domains, air, sea and land. And strikes on targets in Moscow, Russia during any invasion are a key part of Finland's defense strategy. And interestingly, it is written that Finland is now actually deploying and preparing these missiles so that they are aimed directly at Moscow. In the end, all of this makes Finland feel relatively calm. Few Finns believe that Russia would choose their border as the place for its first test of NATO's resolve, but they are ready if it happens. He also writes that Finns are firmly convinced that their strategic position from the Arctic to the Baltic Sea means that the United States cannot afford to leave them to their fate. Norway, which has a 200-kilometer border with Russia, is also increasing its troops. The country's government plans to expand the size of the army brigade from 1 to 3 by 2032, with 2 of them to be stationed in the north. Its ground forces in the border region of Finnmark will be supplemented with air defense systems, artillery, and a light infantry battalion, a reconnaissance company, and specialized rapid response forces. In other parts of northern Norway, a new heavy infantry brigade will be formed. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre says that although there is no immediate threat at the moment, all frontline countries know that Russia plans to restore its separate Moscow and Leningrad military districts. According to Western intelligence officials, this move will likely double the number of Russian troops the region faces compared to the levels before the invasion of Ukraine. As Støre says, Norway poses no threat to anyone, but we have a responsibility to make sure that no one gets the idea to threaten us. Few people believe that a Russian attack on NATO would start from northern mainland Norway, but there are concerns about a possible conflict on the demilitarized Arctic archipelago. Svalbard, which is Norwegian territory, but is also home to a Russian settlement. And next, I'll quote one of the European intelligence officers as cited by Svalbard. It should be somewhere at the top of the list of places where Russia might try something, but Svalbard is just as much Norway as Oslo or Stavanger. He goes on to write that NATO ground forces led by Sweden will now be based in the sparsely populated northern region of Lapland and will include troops from Denmark, France, Iceland, Norway, and the United Kingdom. However, the situation is complicated in the 3 Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which are considered the most vulnerable region to a potential attack from Russia. This is mainly due to their small size and isolated location. The distance from the Russian border to the Baltic Sea is only about 200 kilometers, which makes tactical retreats in the Finnish style and bringing in reinforcements difficult. There is also the 100-kilometer Suwalki Gap, which connects Lithuania with Poland, but it is located between the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad to the west and Belarus to the east. And as the president of Lithuania, Gitanas Nausėda, says, explaining the different geographical situation, unfortunately, we are not as strategically deep as Ukraine, and that's a problem. According to him, the country is ready to defend itself for a while, but will count on reinforcements from NATO. This means that the Baltic countries need plans A, B, and C, since there are ongoing questions about the United States' commitments to Europe. And so, as a high-ranking official from one of the Baltic countries writes, he speaks more directly and says that supposedly the Americans are leaving. We all need to realize this and come to terms with it. Another difference from Finland is that in the Baltic countries, the major cities are located right near Russia. The previous NATO defense plan for the Baltic countries was to allow Russia to invade and then retake these cities with reinforcements from Germany and Poland. The destruction and mass killings in Ukrainian cities like Bucha and Mariupol have made this impossible. They are no longer considering allowing the Russians in and retaking these cities later. Each Baltic country is also increasing its own military capabilities, and together they are working on developing joint plans for mass evacuation. Poland has numerous NATO military facilities, including ground, air, and missile defense bases. But Russian and Allied bases, including naval and air bases, are also present in Kaliningrad and Belarus. And Poland's proximity to the war in Ukraine and its long border with Belarus make it a key stronghold against any future Russian aggression. And Poland has decided to increase the size of its army to 500,000 troops and to introduce a military training system for all adult men by the end of this year. Warsaw is also purchasing long-range missiles capable of striking targets even inside Russia. Poland is also strengthening its borders, but the most ambitious Polish border defense project is the so-called Eastern Shield, which involves a combination of air defense systems and ground infrastructure, ranging from anti-tank ditches to obstacles like hedgehogs and mined ground. Along with the Baltic states, Poland has also withdrawn from the international treaty banning anti-personnel mines, giving all 4 countries the freedom to deploy them on their borders if necessary. And, as he writes, although the Suwalki Gap, which connects Poland with Lithuania, may be a vulnerable spot. Baltic officials believe that NATO could put pressure on Kaliningrad in the event of any attack, such as a potential blockade of the Baltic Sea. But the big unknown for all of Europe is how Putin assesses his chances. Last month, the Russian dictator dismissed the suggestion that Moscow poses a growing threat. He called them nonsense and stated that increasing Europe's military spending is irrational and meaningless. But, as you understand, trusting the unwashed Russian is absolutely a thankless task. These unwashed, savage Russians. They already said they weren't going to attack Ukraine, then they attacked, and so on. But, as it is written, any inability to respond decisively to future aggression from Moscow will signal the end of the alliance. Therefore, much may depend on whether Putin feels emboldened after the results of his war in Ukraine. If a bad peace is imposed on Ukraine, Russia will deem the risks as justified. Well, I'll touch on one more issue, and it concerns Denmark. The fact is that in Denmark, starting today, from July 1st, a law has come into force that obliges women to serve in the military on equal terms with men. First, they will undergo extended basic training and then practical skills. At first, women volunteers will be recruited into the army and the rest of the participants will be selected by lottery. In addition to introducing equal service conditions for men and women, Denmark is also changing the structure of conscription. Starting from 2026, the term of service will be extended from 4 to 11 months. So, as you can see, the entire eastern flank of NATO is really preparing for a possible confrontation with the savage Russians. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.